So we're gonna get into structure rendering in Photoshop. I'm gonna start off with a basic structure. This is just a basic jar structure. This case for vitamin K cream. So the first thing I'm gonna do is gonna go into Illustrator. I'm gonna start here just to get some vector shapes to work with in Photoshop. But I'm gonna import that image, Command Shift P to import, navigate to where that image is, place, and then I'm just going to place it in here. So again, I'm just going to create some shapes with the rectangle tool. I'm going to turn off my smart guides. Command U turns smart guides on and off, and quick key M for the rectangle tool. And I'm just going to create a quick rectangle. And when you're using this tool, you can hold spacebar to move it around. And I'm going to give it a little gray color and get rid of this stroke. So X to switch the stroke to the front, and the question mark / key to get rid of it. And I'll just hit X again to switch that fill color back to the front. And I'm going to turn my smart guides back on again really quickly, Command U, and I'm gonna Option drag this up so it creates that shape. And I'm just gonna resize it so it's pretty close. And I'm gonna take these two objects and just move them over, Shift drag it so it's next to it. And again, on this object you can see there's a little rounded corners, so I'm just going to use that rounded corner tool. And then this top one, maybe you can soften it a little bit because it's not a strictly hard edge. So again, I'm just giving it a tiny little rounded corner. When you zoom out, it's barely going to be visible, but these kind of details you can kind of pick and choose what you want to add. And then one last tiny thing is it looks like there's a little bit of a curve in the top. So I'm just gonna, add a tiny little curve here by going to Effect, Warp, and then Arc Upper. And, just a 1%, maybe 2% if you're feeling, like you want to see it more. I'm in OK. And now I have my two shapes that are basically this base shape and then the lid closure on top. And then I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste into Photoshop, but I'm going to copy and paste them separately. So just Command C on this bottom one. And then I'm going to go in, I'm going to create a new document, Command N, and I'm going to make this document 5 by 5, and I'll make the resolution 150. And CMYK is good. Create that. And again, I'm going to paste this in Command V. And I always paste it as a smart object vector. And I keep this unchecked. Add to the library, keep that unchecked, because otherwise that smart object does no one any good if they're opening up your file, unless they're working on your computer with your libraries. Hit OK. And I have my smart object. I'm just going to hit return or enter, and then I'm going to just drag that down a little bit, and I'll name that base, and then I'm going to copy this, same thing, Command V, paste the smart object again. Everything else should be unchecked, and I'll just move that up. And I have my view snap here set, so that will snap into place. You can see I can move it around or whatever, and when I just move it close, it snaps into place. So now I have my basic shapes, and I'm just kind of keeping this Illustrator in the background so you can kind of see just a little reference. And you can do a couple things. You can start coloring these things. So let's say I want to actually follow the color of what's happening here. I'm going to go to FX and do a color overlay. And I will launch this color style, and I'll pick a red that's similar. Sorry, let me just go back here, and I'll pick a Looks like a pretty pinkish, maroonish kind of red. And I'm gonna do that for the lid. And then for the base, I'm actually just gonna do like a dark red rather than a gradient, just for the point of this. But you could do a gradient overlay too. But for this purpose, I'm just gonna make it kind of a really dark maroon. And you know, that, again, I have the basic colors and the basic shapes, and the rest of the stuff I can do with, you know, kind of different effects here. So I'm just gonna collapse these FX things we have going on here. And now what I'm gonna do is, there's different ways you can do this. I'm gonna do this destructively for now. But you know, there's non-destructive ways to do it. But when you're dealing with these kind of lighting effects, you know, they're fairly easy to create. So you can kind of just work with stuff and see what you like, and you know, you can trash it when you're done if you don't like it, or recreate different shapes and so forth. So for the base, I'm just gonna make a selection of it. I'm gonna create a new layer, and I'm going to fill it with white, because white is my background color over here. I'm gonna do Command Delete, and you know, I just have a white layer of that shape. You can see if I turn it on and off. But what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna bring the opacity down, and I'm gonna actually duplicate this because I want to use it a couple times. So I'm gonna hit Command J. I'm gonna hide that first one. And now I have this again. And what I want to do is I want to create this kind of little edge, you know, highlight that it has on here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select it again, but then I'm going to go to select transform selection, and I'm going to drag this in. Depending on the version of Photoshop you have, it's either Option to drag or Option and Shift. On the newer versions, you hold Option and Shift, and it drags, you know, your selection or whatever the bounding box is in. And I'm going to hit Return, and I'm going to hit Delete, because now I have this selection on this layer. I'm going to hit Delete, and you can see it gives me a similar kind of effect to that edge there. And I can, you know, pull the opacity down even more if I want. And you know, if you really want to get some subtleties like this, another thing you can do is you can mask it and then use a soft brush and just, you know, a small soft brush, and I'm going to do it at like 20% opacity. And you know, again, with black, I can click and, you know, get some real subtleties going just by masking this. You know, then I can bump the opacity back up if I want a little bit more, but you get the point. It's giving you just some of those subtleties. And then if I want to do what this is doing here, you know, you see like a little bit, it's pulled down a little bit, just to kind of give that top a little shading look to it. So I'll, you know, Command T it, and I can just pull it down a little bit. I'm actually going to go in here and I'm going to click off my snap for a minute, and then hold the Shift button again in the later versions of Photoshop. In other versions, you might have to hold down Shift and Option. So again, I have that little highlight, and that's it. You know, pretty simple. And you could do the same thing with the cat. Just do that really quickly. You know, again, fill it with white. I'm going to Command J and hide one. Bring the opacity down. Same thing. Make the selection. Select. Transform selection. And I'm going to Option Shift. Drag this in. I'll hit Return. Delete. And you know, again, it's just giving me this edge. And I can bring the opacity down a little bit more if I want. And now to create these highlights here, I have that other shape, down here, and this other shape here. I'm just going to do these together this time. I'll try to match the opacity, so say I have it about 50 on both of them. And again, it's easy enough to create these, so you don't have to keep duplicating them, because all they are is just copies of the other shapes, the main shape and the cat. So I'm going to Command T. This time I'm going to manually kind of do it, and you know what, I'm going to do it a little bit differently than I think this render. But so now I have similar kind of line up to that. I am going to bring this bottom one down a little bit, kind of match what's going on with the other shape. Seeing a little bit of the the shading or whatever you want to call it, and we can work on those details further, but this is just kind of a quick way to do it. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the bottom one and then hold down Shift and to select, Command click on here, and hold down Shift and Command click on here, and I'm going to transform the selection. Again, select transform selection, and then same thing, I'm going to hold down Shift to manually do it, and I'm kind of just matching this like space in between here. And then I'll go to each respective layer and just hit delete. Go here and delete. And again, I have the basis for what I need for these highlights, and then I can go and I can do different things to them. One thing I can do, if I want to, I can make these a smart object. So I'm going to make this a smart object here. So again, that's this highlight on the lid. I can call that lid high. I'll call these lid edge. I will just call this lid. Just naming all these things respectively so they're easy to find. But I made this a smart object already. I'm going to make this a smart object now. And I'm going to do this because I'm going to blur it a little bit. So filter, blur, I'm going to go to motion blur. And I'm just going to, drag it down a little bit, but just because, I want to soften this edge just a little bit. 6 pixels looks good. Again, and then I can do some brush mask work to kind of, fix that and make it exactly how I want it to look. But then I'm going to do the same thing here. I'll just go to filter, motion blur will be at the top, be the last thing I did, and we'll do the exact same amount on that. And if I want, I can, move these things over a little bit or do that. And then again, same thing I did with the previous one. I just mask it, and I'm going to take the bigger brush, still 20% right now, and I'm actually going to do it from the top, even though it's only affecting this layer right now. But I'm softening it up, similar to how this is like softening up on the inside. I'll make this bigger, do the same kind of thing here. So again, it's really just giving that effect of like it fading out, similar to how it is here. And then I'm gonna command click on the mask here, and that way I can put it right on this lid highlight too, and it will give you the same effect there. So for all intents and purposes, that's basically kind of what's going on with this. And again, same thing with like the lid here. If I want to pull this down a little bit, I'll unlink it from the mask for now, but I can bring it off the edge a little bit, similar to what's going on here. And then if I want to get some of these dark spots in here, I can literally just, you know, add a, let's say a brush stroke. I'm going to create a new layer here. Actually, I'll create this layer at the top here, and I'm going to just, again, I have still with 20% opacity. I'll make the brush about that big, and I'm just holding shift and clicking to drag a couple times, and I'm going to go with a linear burn blending mode here, and then I'm just going to use the selection here from the base and the selection from the lid. Again, command click here and then hold down shift and command click there. So I have both of these items, and I'm just going to create a mask now on that. Now, pretty simple, but I have that dark, kind of hit. And just like that, very simple, you're creating like some of these easy light effects, right? And last thing I'm going to do is actually I'm going to pull this base highlight up a little bit, just off the edge, similar to how that's working there, just so you can see with a very little bit of work you can create something that looks pretty slick. And the more details you want to add, you can go and you can tweak little things, you can add little things, add more shadows. If you want, we can create a reflection shadow for this, but we'll get into that later. But again, that's the very simple steps of how you can just use transform tools, some masking, some brushing, just creating some basic shapes, and just like that you have a structure that looks pretty good. So we'll move on to more complex stuff in another tutorial, but for now that is a good start.